Welcome to the Arcology, a Shadowcasters Network show about all things Shadowrun. I'm Mr. Johnson, and today we'll be talking about vehicle design and customization. Now for the news. Not too much news for Shadowrun this time, just that the Catalyst demo team will be at Origins Game Fair this month, and I'll dovetail off of that. Then Fracking Unicorns Games news, the Fug and the Rem Alternus crew will be at Origins Game Fair, as will I. I'll be running a lot of Misspent Youth and Subversion events, and I hope to see you there. Just a note about the show. Since 2 weeks from today would be our next regular show date, but that's in the middle of Origins, we will not be doing a show, but I very much hope to see some of you there. If you happen to see me or recognize my voice or whatever, want to come say hello, talk about Shadowrun or Subversion or other stuff, I'll be hanging out and having a good time at Origins. So hope to see you there. I would also like to mention that Hellslayers, my new RPG, which is a hack and slash of Morkborg inspired by classic Doom and System Shock and other computer games, is coming soon. There's an actual play that's been going on for a few weeks now. It's live on twitch.tv/Master of Rem. You can catch up on replays there. And the next episode, which should be our final episode of the mini-series, will be on July 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So check out the fireworks before you check out the fireworks, I guess. But I want to mention the Kickstarter page is now up. Please go check it out and follow. When we launch generally depends on us getting a certain amount of followers. So I would like to please ask anyone who might be interested in Hellslayers to please go check that out and sign up. And yeah, we'll go live with that sometime this year. We're kind of aiming at September now, I think. But again, that largely is determined by getting enough followers. So let's just move on with our main topic of vehicle design and customization. So Shadowrun Sixth World Edition, ever since Double Clutch came out, now has rules for designing and customizing and building your own vehicles from scratch. So there's a lot of rules in there, and attention goes towards, say, picking up a Bulldog step van or some other vehicle and adding a bunch of modifications to tweak it. And that's generally a more cost-effective way to go about it. But if you want a vehicle that's exactly the way you want it, you can actually go in. There's a chapter in Double Clutch that covers vehicle design. And it's a little bit in depth, but this is Sixth World Edition, so it's not super duper crunchy. So we'll just go ahead and go through the process here as a tutorial for vehicle design. So first thing you need to do, not really covered in the rules, but it's a really important first step before you actually go about building the vehicle, is to come up with a concept. You need to come up with some sort of a concept or idea of what you want the vehicle to be, which is largely going to be defined by what the vehicle's primary purpose is going to be. And you could probably mix and match some of these purposes as well. No, the vehicles don't have to be like all one or the other necessarily, but these are definitely some possible purposes worth considering. First of all is reconnaissance. Largely speaking, this is generally best pulled off by really small drones that are good at being sneaky. Vehicle for reconnaissance that's not a drone would also need to be probably on the smaller side, but has to have ways of noticing things and not being noticed itself. So things like passive stealth features, if you can afford it, chameleon coating would be ideal. Also having a solid sensor suite, because that's going to be involved in detecting things. So reconnaissance vehicle has some considerations, largely none of which have to do with being tough and being able to handle getting shot. So next up as an option would be a getaway vehicle. So not so much a role for drones, but for a vehicle to be able to sit in. Getaway vehicle needs to be able to get away from trouble. So you might have this be your vehicle that you get in and get out of trouble with on a run. Maybe your primary transport is going to have to have enough seating for as many people that are trying to get away. You're going to have a good things like good handling, speed interval, good top speed doesn't hurt, but it's probably not the main thing because you're likely to be driving in some fairly tight conditions where you're not going to be getting it to full speed. And maybe having some ways to the to change the vehicle's appearance or look a little bit different. Something like electrochromic painting. Electrochromic paint is a really inexpensive feature. You can make your van suddenly look like a delivery vehicle from a different corp. Just make sure to get it out of sight for a moment before you trigger the switch, or they'll just keep following you and point out that you changed. So, spoof chips, morphing license plate, plenty of seating, lots of mobility. Some attention towards armor, maybe because you might be getting shot at while you're getting away, but it's not the primary focus. Another similar vehicle purpose would be racing. If you're doing racing, this is probably not so much for running, but more as a sport. So a vehicle like this is going to be quick, probably light, have good handling, top speed, speed interval. All of that is everything. Armor, not so important. You want it to be light and fast. Although the type of racing may depend on how you choose this. So if it's say off-road rally racing, obviously something like off-road handling is going to be a lot more important than say something doing a drag race or stock car races, stuff like that. Though I guess a customized vehicle wouldn't be welcome in a stock car race unless you made it look like it fit in. So another option, very similar to the getaway in a racing vehicle, is the Interceptor. So this is a vehicle that needs to be able to go fast and catch up to things. Maybe if you're going to pull off an extraction on the highway, or chase down somebody who's stolen something. Or this is a vehicle that's designed to get up to somebody and then deal with the problem. So kind of like a getaway in a racing vehicle, you've got to have decent handling, top speed, speed interval, that sort of thing is important, but it also needs to be able to handle itself in a fight. So, because when it intercepts something, it's going to have to do something about it, whether it's run it off the road or be involved in a gunfight, or maybe just tail them for some time. For that purpose, you probably want to have some decent sensors as well. An interceptor is probably going to be a more expensive and complex build than a straight up getaway or racing vehicle. Another purpose is transport. If you're transporting your crew around, going from point A to point B, transporting clients, targets, subjects, etc. Main thing you need for a transport is plenty of cargo space and seating. It wouldn't hurt to have some creature comforts like amenities, and depending on the situations you're going to be in, you might build it more for stealth or misdirection, or something to be more tough so it can handle when it gets attacked. A variation on that would be a cargo or smuggling vehicle. Seating is less important for those, but stealth and misdirection are high on the list. Chances are they're going to be it's going to be important for them to have good off-road handling because you'll have to take some routes that aren't they're off the beaten trail, so to speak. Another thing to consider is on and off-road handling, whether your vehicle is going to be mostly driving on roads or whether it's mostly going to be driving um, out in the boonies and off-road. Your on and off-road handling is going to be a very important factor for most ground vehicles. We're talking watercraft, walkers, hovercraft, and aircraft doesn't come into play. They just have one handling number. But most ground vehicles typically have two handling ratings for on and off-road. Couple other options you might want to consider for purposes is a mobile HQ. This could be a combination of some of the above, but the idea that your team goes around in this, makes plans, your vehicle's your safe house. You probably don't want to use this vehicle, like put it directly in harm's way because you're going to have so much invested in it. But that's definitely a fun option for a vehicle. Another option is a home if you want to build your lifestyle around the RV that you live in. Um, Again, creature comforts are going to be more important here. A lot of the different mods for things you want to have around, tools, medical support, as well as just plenty of room for your seating and cargo. Beyond the purpose, you probably want to consider like just an idea of what your vehicle is going to look and feel like. Is it more like a rugged off-road vehicle, kind of like a Jeep or a Rover? Is it a more of a luxury craft like a limousine or a yacht? Is it something you want to blend in, be able to sort of drive down the highway with the rest of the people commuting to and from work and look like you're not up to something illegal? That can be important. Or do you want to design your vehicle for intimidation? Big, tough spikes in it, obvious armor, guns that can pop out, a whole look that says "Don't frag with me." Those are a few options that I can think of for look and feel, but honestly, this is a fairly unlimited category. If you're handy at drawing or know someone who is, it could be nice to have a picture to go off as you go forward. But once you have your vehicle concept fairly firmly in mind, you don't have to hammer out all the details because details are what comes next. It's time to move on to the actual game mechanic step of designing your build. So the first step for this is to choose a chassis type. Chassis type will define your vehicle's size, its starting body and armor, handling, seating, something called size class, which determines things like how much cargo you have and a few other things. These are sort of a list of different kinds of vehicles, like a car, a bike, a truck, a plane, etc. There's a couple of special options on some of them, like the truck automatically gains extra cargo space. Submersibles gain underwater adaptation. It makes sense. There wouldn't be a submersible if they couldn't go underwater. And with each choice on this list, there is a build point cost. Build points are essentially like a currency of points that we're going to use during this process. And this number gradually gets bigger, and we'll use that to define mostly how much new yen this is going to cost you. So, generally speaking, each build point is going to cost you 1,000 new yen, but there are things like multipliers that will affect this down the road. So, once you've defined the chassis type, it's time to define the powertrain. The powertrain is like what kind of engine it has, how it goes about moving, what sort of moving pieces or bits it has on there. This defines your acceleration, your speed interval, and top speed, at least your starting point for that. And there's a build point cost that's different for each of those. The available types are wheeled, which are going to be most ground vehicles, tracked, like tanks. They get a -2 to their off road handling, which is pretty nice. Walker, there's no top speed loss for body and armor on a walker because, well, they're not that fast to begin with, for one. But yeah, if you ever thought about designing a mecha to go around with in Shadowrun, there's rules for that now, though you won't find a mecha in the book necessarily, at least not the double clutch. Hovercraft are kind of nice. They get -2 handling. I'm not sure why. It seems like a hovercraft would be a little bit harder vehicle to handle because they kind of slide around and stuff. You don't really have traction, but at least in Shadowrun Sixth World Edition, hovercraft are really easy to control. For watercraft, you've got the options of a propeller, a jet, or sail. Aircraft, you've got the option of propeller and jet as well. Also, things like vectored thrust, which basically big old thrusters that it can turn. You can vector the thrust to allow for greater maneuverability in the air, and it's able to take off and land on a dime. Also, you can have an option to glide, where it's basically just gliding through the air under sort of the sail equivalent of aircraft. Also, we have rotors and prominent available to most people. The build point cost is generally put there to make it out of your reach, but grav tech does exist, sort of anti-grav repulsor lift technology. You can thank the monads for that. We might be seeing more of that in future editions of Shadowrun, but right now it's sort of an on the fringes tech that is largely unavailable to player characters unless you're playing a really, really high end power level campaign. So once you've chosen the chassis and the powertrain, another thing, another core aspect to choose before you can move on to the nitty gritty details is the console, which is just the word for the electronics package. This defines your starting pilot and sensor ratings. Probably not so important for most vehicles you're going to be piloting directly, but super important for drones. There's a build point cost for this, and in the book I saw there's a special tab that has some numbers in some categories and dashes in the other. I couldn't find any descriptions for what that was supposed to mean, and I couldn't find anything in the errata either. So I would just say ignore that for now, unless you know what that is. If you know what the special tab is in the electronics package or the console sidebar in Double Clutch, please let me know because I could not figure it out. Now, I guess I should mention at this point that there is This is a process that you're going to need to involve your game master in. And I would say please be generous with your game master's objections to certain things, because there are some combinations of things that you could do with this design process that can make some kind of broken or weird stuff that might not fit so well in the campaign. So the GM veto is going to be important, but also GM interpretation of some of these rules is going to come into play, because some of them are not super clear, and some are even missing important details, such as when we get to the actual process for designing, essentially creating your design in character that you can build from. There's a roll that you make for that, and it mentions a calculation for a threshold for that. That, as far as I can tell, maybe I missed it, maybe I just didn't read it, but as far as I can tell, it's just not there. So we'll discuss some of those as we come across them. Overall, I think this build and design process is really neat and has some cool stuff in it. It's worth, I think, sanding off the rough edges as much as you need to. It's still workable, but ultimately does require some interpretation and some choices in how that interpretation is going to be made. So again, please involve your game master and be kind to them, and understand that they may have objections that you might not like, but they make a lot of sense probably in some of the contexts here. So moving on to the design options. So first of all, I want to mention that any mod under the mods list uh, can be built such that it's integral to the vehicle design. So it doesn't take up any mod slots, but this will add 2 build points per mod slot to your vehicle cost. It also says to add the build point cost of the mod to your build point total, but if you look at the mods in the mods section, they don't have build points listed. So there's one of those rough edges I was talking about. My suggestion is to just add the new yen cost of the mod to the final vehicle cost, in addition to the build points. The build points are going to be affected by the multipliers and modifiers, and then you just add the flat amount of new yen cost for the mods to the vehicle at the end. That's how I would do it. A GM might decide to add the new yen cost in before the multipliers are applied as well. That makes sense too, but it's going to make things a bit more expensive for your players. Other options are you can improve the armor to a maximum of the vehicle's original body times 2. You can improve the handling, which can apply to both on or off-road handling. There's a separate build point cost for each. And again, here's another rough edge. It doesn't say what the build point cost is for this when applying to vehicles that don't have a separate on and off-road handling. Do you apply the more expensive cost that would apply to both on and off-road handling, or do you just apply the cost that would apply to just on or off-road handling? The difference is 2 build points per level. Your GM may rule that the more or less expensive cost applies. I think my way of approaching it would be the vehicles that have only one handling number. They're typically using some more complex and probably more expensive systems like flight or walkers, things like that. So it makes sense to me to go with the more expensive option and to have it cost 5 build points per level. But your GM may decide differently. You can improve the seating to a max of plus 50%. You can improve the size, which is actually a pretty nice mod. Every level of this adds plus 2 to the body and 50% increase to seating. So, yeah, that is a pretty efficient way to increase some of the stats. Improved acceleration up to 2 levels. Each level increases acceleration by 5. Improved speed interval, I mean. The speed interval is a measure of how more difficult it is to handle the vehicles. It gets faster and faster. Each level adds 5. Max levels are 3. You can improve the top speed by 25 per level, up to a max level of 3. I'd like to say I would have preferred, I think, to see some separate options here for some of the different types of movement. Like, it makes sense to me that, like, increasing your speed interval for a plane that's flying at much faster speeds than, say, a moped, um, you would get more speed intervals, or maybe a higher max level you could do. But it's the same across the board, no matter what vehicle you have, rules as written. Other options are to improve your cargo space um, to a max increase of double the original based on the size class. So you need to look at the size class chart for your vehicle to determine what the base cargo space is. And another option is to make the vehicle easily modified so you can add additional mod slots for further mods down the road. Now, some of these options, many of these options can actually be achieved through mods or their effects for the most part. But the important thing to note about these design options is they are integral to the vehicle's chassis and they don't take up mod slots. Mod slots are for after the vehicle is made, typically when you customize it. During the design process, we get to build that stuff in. So it's essentially a lot more well integrated in the overall system. It's probably more expensive overall, though it likely depends on your overall design and mod choices to build it into the original design. But hey, this isn't for. Typically, you're not going to be using the vehicle design and customization rules to just build some throwaway vehicle. This is going to be your baby, or at least one of them. So it makes sense to give them the best. Under design modifications, we get into some essentially some conceptual differences between types of vehicles that can apply to how they work. So these are things like a cargo hauler, a heavier duty or a lighter weight version, a high performance racing or economy engine. And the way those work is you choose that option. There's a build point cost, and then some sort of a package deal of how it affects your stats. So the cargo hauler doubles the cargo capacity, reduces the seating by half, and the armor doesn't count as much towards determining the overall speed reduction, which we'll get to that thing later. It counts as two size classes larger for towing capacity and only gains half of the bonuses that might be applied from adding a high performance engine or a multi engine. This has a certain build point cost. Another option is to make a vehicle either heavy duty or lightweight. A heavy duty vehicle has 50% more body and therefore can resist damage more effectively. A light vehicle has half the body, and you get some build points back for doing that. A high performance engine adds to your acceleration and top speed. A racing engine adds to your acceleration and top speed by twice as much, with the addition that it is not street legal, which is probably only a problem if they can catch you and pull you over. The economy option gives you some build points back at the cost of acceleration and top speed. You can also do something called integrated armor here. So the armor is built in the chassis design and doesn't affect speed as much. A mass transit vehicle has triple the base seating. A multi-engine vehicle, which I should say GMs look at this one pretty closely. There's a big build point cost, so you definitely have to pay a lot for it. But this doubles the acceleration and top speed, which can create some interesting options. Just if you go ahead and throw together a hover bike with all the boost and the double excel and top speed, we're talking a supersonic hover bike, which could outrun pretty much anything, but it's probably going to smash into the nearest object because you're moving so fast. Another option is to go with off-road, so you can shift one of your points of on-road handling to off-road handling at the cost of reducing your speed a little bit. But again, this doesn't take up any mod slots. And the other option is sort of a drawback, underpowered. You reduce the final speed total by half, but you get some build points back for that. So speed is not so important. It might be might be a good way to save some money. Now, all of these things we've been talking to up until this point all cost, or in some cases, give you back some build points, but they all affect sort of adding together the build points. Once you're up to this point and you've chosen everything on that, you have your final build point total, probably. But some things might affect that, such as quality factors. These don't have a build point cost, but they provide a multiplier to your build points. So this is where what you thought was going to be an affordable vehicle starts becoming a lot more expensive, most likely. So here are the options for quality factor. Is anthropomorphic. This means the vehicle has a couple of arms and legs and kind of walks and moves like a humanoid. This is only available to walkers. They can be obvious or synthetic, so you can have walkers that are designed to look like a metahuman. Size 4 or less can go anywhere metahumans can fit, and this will double your build point cost. Next is cutting edge. It's fancy new tech that no one's heard of before. There's no real game mechanics for this. This is more of a narrative thing. The cost modifier is times 10. Game masters, if someone in your group is coming up with something just crazy out there, and you don't want to necessarily say no because, hey, there's rules for it, right? But you also kind of want to put the brakes on it or make it something you have to work for more. That's what this is for. This will multiply the build point cost by 10 because it's just a super fancy cutting edge stuff. Generally speaking, this sort of thing is probably outside of the scope of what player characters are likely to be able to make, but hey, it's there. Another one is drone. If it's a drone, not a vehicle that people can ride in, your cost modifier, your build point cost is going to be cut in half. And then we have environmental adaptation. So some examples are underwater, Arctic, volcanic, high altitude, outer space. Is designed to operate in some other environment. That doubles your build point cost. Mass produced. The vehicle is designed and has infrastructure set up to be able to build it on assembly lines. Generally speaking, not available to PCs. But if you are a corporation with a vehicle factory, your build point cost will be cut in half. Another option on this is a one-off custom. This will probably apply to any vehicle or drone designed and made by a player character. And I'm sad to say that doubles the build point cost. But one way to save on that is to make it a junkyard Frankenstein. It runs good, but it looks weird and distinctive. There's a certain Johnny Cash song that comes to mind when I think about this. Sort of taking parts off the line one at a time over the years and put it together and make it work. It runs good, but it looks weird. It's definitely going to distinctive. It's going to turn heads. Probably not a good option for a vehicle you want to blend in, but if it's your RV that you're living in the Barrens, it might be perfect. But this will cut your build point cost in half. Next is specialized function. So the vehicle has a specialized function like it's a tow truck or rescue vehicle, ambulance, construction vehicle, double the build point cost. I don't really understand the reasoning behind this because there are specific modifications and things that are added to vehicles that have their own cost that would sort of let them fill this rule. This is just like, hey, what's that? Oh, it's my van with a winch on it. Oh, awesome. That's regular build point cost. What's that? It's my tow truck. Oh, double build point cost. So I, as a GM, I would probably kind of hand wave this one away for the most part. But there are some cases where it might come into play. Next is the luxury option, which just makes the vehicle cost more to make it look more expensive. So you can rub it in other people's faces or blend in with the rich crowd because you're stealing money from them or extracting one of them or something. The security and military options are kind of neat. They double or triple the build point cost, but they upgrade the default armor to either ceramic plate or mil-spec plate, which is pretty nice. Ceramic plate can still blend in okay for the most part, and it gives you extra dice to resist damage. Mil-spec plate is going to stand out as something scary and heavily armored and definitely draw some attention, but it's also good at deflecting a lot of the hostile attention of things like bullets. And the last option, which is probably not going to come into play for most player characters, but who knows? Superstructure. The vehicle is huge. We're talking like not going to drive on the roads. It's as big as a building or more. So this is something you might apply to say if you're building a like a naval ship or an aircraft carrier or a giant airship. So yeah, that's no moon. Definitely, that's going to triple the build point cost, but also makes it much more resistant to damage because it's so big. It essentially has a whole new set of rules for resisting damage involving the damaging a structure rules. So once you've got all those modifiers chosen, One thing that isn't super clear in the chapter is how those interact with each other. So, for instance, if I have a drone with environmental adaptation, um, do I reduce the build point cost by half for the drone thing and then double it for the environmental adaptation, or do I double it first and then cut it in half? Those equations turn out with somewhat different numbers, pretty different. I'm not super good at math, but I'm pretty sure those add up to different totals. Maybe I'm mistaken, but if you start applying multiple of them, do you multiply the multipliers and then multiply the multipliers again? I'm not really sure. My inclination would be to, if they're all just higher multipliers, they're not cutting things in half, just add all of those multipliers up and then multiply it. So if I had a one-off custom that's times 2, and it's a security vehicle, which is another times 2, instead of doing times 2 and then doubling that again, which would be an exponential increase, I would probably make it times 4, which would be a solid increase, but not get so out of hand. The question is, when it's halved for something, or you've got multiple halves involved, like there's not really any super guidance on how to do this math. And I don't have a real solid answer or suggestion on how to approach that. This is where your individual game master is just going to have to look at the numbers and make a call. Generally speaking, I would probably, okay, here's my suggestion. I just came up with this now, so might not be the best idea, but it's an idea. Add up all the multipliers that increase it, so not the times 1/2 or whatever. Add all those up first till you get like one number that's times whatever. Then take your half price things and apply those one at a time, I suppose. That might reduce it a bit too much. See, the math gets tricky here. Maybe the best thing to do is only pick one or two of these options. But moving on to the final calculations, you got to figure out your final body, armor, excel, and top speed based on the things you chose, rounding down. And then we have one more step that's going to affect your acceleration and top speed. And that is the speed modifier. We've referenced that in some of these steps. They cut the armor down as it counts towards this. But basically, you take your vehicle's final before mods. So this is before counting any mod slots, just the basic design. You take the body, divide it by 2, and then add the armor. And you have a number called the speed modifier. Now for the acceleration, you cut the speed modifier in half, and you subtract that from your acceleration. If you want it to be higher, you're going to have to actually increase it with mods down the road. Then we have the top speed. Take the speed modifier and multiply it by 10 and subtract that from the top speed. We'll mention, I did mention it before, but I'll mention it again, that if you have a walker, this skips the speed and the excel reduction. It's immune to that. But smaller drones, on the other hand, actually further reduce top speed. Once you've taken the speed modifier times 10 away from your top speed, with a micro drone, you then cut the speed down to 1/4. A mini drone would cut the speed down to half, and a small drone would cut the speed down to 3/4, which makes sense. They're smaller, they got smaller engines, smaller movement systems. A flying micro drone is not going to be able to go as fast as a jet. Whew, all right, now that we've done all that, most of the work of designing your custom vehicle is done. You've got your build point cost after the modifiers. You've got your final body and armor and excel and speed as it applies to those modifiers. Now, let's find out how much nuing that's going to cost you. Take your final build point total and multiply it by 1,000 nuyen. That's the vehicle's cost. However, if you build the vehicle yourself, you can divide that cost in half. And we'll get into how you do that in a moment. But before we move on, we also want to talk about availability. The base availability of a vehicle is 2. And if it's a luxury vehicle, add +1. If it's an aircraft, add +1. If it's a security vehicle, add +1 and make it license required. And if it's a military vehicle, add +2, and it's illegal unless you're a military, which you're not. So with that done, if you want to make it yourself here, first thing you got to do, your character. Now you've designed the vehicle using the rules in Double Clutch, right? So that's in the chapter in here. However, your character has to design the vehicle in game now. That's going to be all the very, very detailed, CAD related work, designing the vehicle before you can even build it. This is an extended test using engineering plus logic. The threshold is 1 day. However, if you increase the threshold to a week, that cuts the threshold in half. Or if you reduce the interval to a week, rather. If you make it 1 week per test instead of 1 day, your threshold is cut in half. If you make it a month per test instead of 1 day, your threshold is reduced to a fourth. However, unless I missed something, and it's entirely possible that it's my mistake and I did, but I looked as closely as I could manage, I could find nothing in the rules that tells you what the threshold is for this design test. So I've got a couple of suggestions, though your game master might just come up with an entirely different way of doing this. That's up to them, since as far as I can tell, it's not rules as written anywhere. The threshold for building a vehicle is 20, so it makes sense to just borrow that threshold for this test, which is 20. Not easy, but for anyone with a solid logic and engineering and a little bit of help, just about anyone could pull it off. Another option will be to take the build point total and divide it by 10. That's going to come up with a number that's, going to be decently high, but simpler vehicles will be easier to design than more complex and expensive ones. That makes sense to me. So those are two ways that I can suggest developing the threshold. But hey, if you've got other ideas, it's up to you. It's worth mentioning that in this step, you can get edge on the process if you have a related knowledge skill. Or there's also something called a virtual garage app, which is like a VR environment where you can build your vehicle and sort of see it in SimSense. And that gives you an edge in every step of the design process as well. So if you're going to be doing vehicle design, it's probably worth it to shell out the new yen for a virtual garage app and maybe a couple karma for a related knowledge skill. Now that the vehicle is designed, you can build it. You can either hire a contact to build it, in which case you'd be paying full price, and it's based on the availability, which is, it's one option. But, if you're a real gearhead, you probably want to build it yourself. And that's going to require a vehicle facility, which is pretty expensive and takes up a lot of space, but it's required. It's the gate that you need to cross in order to even attempt this. Use the vehicle's availability, as we discussed ahead, for parts, for the availability of all the parts. And the vehicle is going to cost you 50% of the new yen cost. So you save a lot of money by doing it yourself. Then you need to make an extended test, engineering plus logic, with an interval of 1 week. So 1 week passes every time you make the roll. Total threshold is 20. I thought this was a little bit weird, though. I gotta wonder, why is there just one threshold for all vehicle designs, no matter what they are? So you could be talking like, I'm going to design a mech that has advanced military spec armor systems and a gravtech drive as a secondary engine, or I'm going to design a tank or an aircraft carrier or just a really nice fuel efficient moped. All of those things take the exact same amount of threshold in order to build. Doesn't make sense to me, but it's also, 6th edition. Things are a little bit faster, simpler. Having fewer big calculations does make a little bit of sense. I would have liked to see something else here, like maybe based off the vehicle's body or build points or something. So if you want a house rule for this, my alternate suggestion for determining this threshold is the vehicle's base body plus 1/10 of the build points. And that covers vehicle design and customization and building. Um, Once your vehicle's built, you can also apply all the mods you want to it down the road. It gets a number of mod slots equal to the vehicle's final body attribute. And there's a lot further customization you can do, unless you already built that all in to the actual chassis design, in which case, wow, you've got a lot of new laying around. So I think that wraps up our main topic here. Let's move on to questions. We had a couple of questions in the chat. One from, I'm just going to shorten your name to Wapo because there's a bunch more characters there. And I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Asking Mr. Johnson, greetings from Germany. Is there news concerning the Let's Play? So yeah, it seems like someone's noticed that I haven't been dropping regular episodes lately. So I apologize for that. I'm going to be getting back in that. I have an actual Let's Play like pretty much ready to drop. And I've got some more I've been working on editing here, but yeah, I guess I might as well share that my mental health has been dreck, really just crappy. I've been having a hard time keeping up with and doing things, feeling overwhelmed, generally depressed, wanting to climb under a rock and hope no one notices that I exist. So that's what's up with that. I'm trying to do better. I am doing better in some ways. I've managed to get a handle on some of the stuff that I was behind on that was overwhelming me. And I really want to get back on track with consistent episode releases. So yeah, keep an eye on your podcast feed. There'll be more coming out soon. And I hope to achieve greater levels of consistency in the future. Ian Franklin asks, howdy folks, did you do much with the vehicle customization rules in SR3? So I played a lot of SR3 back in the day. That was sort of my main edition. I got started in second edition, but when third edition came out, I was like, oh, this is so much better. I love this a lot. And one of the things I loved about it is the vehicle customization rules. They are perhaps a fair bit more in depth than the double clutch ones, but a lot of fun. You can design some really awesome vehicles as long as your game master will let you get away with it. So yeah, I did a fair bit back in the day. I had a rigger whose name was Shaggy, and he had a fan that could also be a submarine and a bunch of drone carriers and all sorts of stuff. So a lot of fun. So any word on how the SR6 rules relate or compare? They relate in that they're designed for the same purpose. They're generally going to be simpler. And yeah, unfortunately, the comparison I have to make is a little bit on the negative side, and I've already sort of brought it up earlier in this episode, is that there are just a number of aspects where their rules are unclear on how to proceed or how things stack or multiply with stuff. And there's a few things that just seemed like they were missing from the chapters. So when people complain about Shadowrun Sixth Edition rules being lacking in certain ways, unfortunately, this chapter is it fits that. There's a lot of stuff I really like about the design rules and customization, and I do love Sixth Edition. But this is one of the warts, I'm afraid. It just could have done with a little bit more thorough work on making sure it was complete. Hate to toss shade at one of my favorite games in the whole world, but in this case, it is warranted, and there's definitely more rules, mechanics, design, decision making that has to be done by the game master with the sixth edition vehicle design rules than there is in, say, Rigor 3, which is a bit more buttoned up. Let's see, any other questions? I'm not seeing any other come in, so I think we'll just move on and close out the episode. So before we do that, I just want to mention that Arcology Podcast is a Patreon. If you want to support the show, we have a couple of different tiers depending on your how much you want to support us. The baseline $2 level makes you a citizen of the Arcology with access to exclusive actual play series available as direct download or through private podcast feeds. Currently on there is a full Lone Star campaign, a Pirates in the Caribbean campaign, a Black Star Neo-Anarchist campaign, and not yet completed or up there all the way through. In process is the Las Vegas campaign, which is ghouls trying to survive in Las Vegas using Shadowrun Anarchy rules. At this tier, you also get access to a patrons-only Discord server. And at the $5 level, you can sit on our actual play recording sessions. And that's always fun. We usually have at least 1 or 2 people in there hanging out with us while we record our actual play. So if you want to see where things are at far in the future of our actual play campaign, it's fun to hang out and do that. You do have to take into account that you're going to get some spoilers, but it's also fun to be there when the magic happens, right? or the long discussions of, hey, when are we getting together next? Yeah, that's lots of fun. Anyway, on that note, I think we will wrap up the session. Thank you so much for joining me today. Had a great time. Hopefully you make some vehicles of your own. I'd love to see your vehicle custom designs that your characters are using or perhaps hope to use when you've acquired enough Nuyen. So feel free to send those our way. And I will see you in a month or maybe sooner if you're going to be at Origins. Thank you. Have a good day.